going to be slightly harder, slightly more involved mathematically as well, but I think um, it's I think very interesting and very important because while it's important to understand the empirical aspects of machine learning, getting them to work, I think it's important to have some kind of a background on the theoretical machine learning and what are the theoretical results that exist in machine learning, right? Okay, so essentially, right, in lecture 14, we looked at the notion of probably approximately correct pack learning, and we saw two specific parameters, which is epsilon and delta, right? So epsilon is basically the error. So this is the error or true error, and this is the high probability bound, right? So this is the delta that has the high probability bound. So essentially epsilon is the error of approximation and 1 minus delta is the probability that given m IID samples, our learning algorithm produces a classifier with error at most epsilon, right? Or in the generalized case, we had that the difference between the train error, or sorry, the test error minus the train error should be less than equal to epsilon, right? So the gap between the two should be less than epsilon. So this was the parameter delta. Okay, so yeah, so basically what this slide is saying is that the bound essentially trades off between these two quantities, right? So if you have very few number of training data points, right, then the generalization bound can be quite poor, right? So even if on the observed data you kind of have a perfect classifier, the true error can be pretty high, right? And yeah, so basically the idea is that we want to see more and more samples. We want m to increase, right? So the main idea of the generalization bound, or maybe I'll just add kind of create a new slide over here. So right, so the generalization bound was that we have epsilon test is less than equal to epsilon train plus one some quantity, right? So this quantity was roughly something like this. It was 1 over, let's just see, yeah, 1 over 2m log size of h plus log 1 over delta, right? So essentially this term will be low. So the gap between the train and the test will be low if m is high and size of h is, or maybe I'll just say it in this way, right? So m is low if m is much larger than log size of h. Okay, so I take the log of the total number of hypotheses, then m should be much larger than that, right? So then this bound will be low. So I think that's what this slide is basically trying to say, and this bound is with probability 1 minus delta, right? So anyways, we took a look at this result. So we saw the sample complexity, right? So we have this bound. This is in the case where of consistent hypothesis, right? So this was in the case where the hypothesis or the true or sorry the train error is equal to zero, right? So in the case where you have zero training error, you can actually come up with this kind of a bound, and then we basically got this result, right, where m is greater than equal to log size of h plus log 1 over delta divided by epsilon. Okay, then we also saw that this is the case of not necessarily zero training error, right? And in the case where we don't necessarily have zero training error, then this is actually the, so here epsilon is the gap between test and train errors, right? So the gap between the test and the train errors is epsilon, then m is greater than equal to log size of h plus log 1 over delta divided by 2 epsilon squared. Okay, so this was the pack bound, this was the generalization bound we saw, right? So with probability 1 minus delta epsilon h, which is the true error. So this is the true error, or also the test error, right? Unseen test error is less than equal to epsilon h train, which is the bias term, plus this 1 over 2m, square root of 1 over 2m log of size of h plus log 1 over delta. This is the variance term, right? We saw this, so I'll just skip this. Okay, so now kind of fundamental to the analysis previously was that size of h is fixed, right? It's a constant. Now size of h is not fixed. I mean, it's sorry, not fixed. I mean, finite, right? So this assumes that size of h is finite, right? But for most kind of standard models, size of h is going to be infinite. Okay, so the question is that what can we do if size of h is infinite, right? So we have like basically any linear model, right? And also like decision trees, nearest neighbor, then probably take a look at neural network models, any of these fancy, interesting models, really, right? All of them have um, basically size of h being infinite. The reason why size of h is infinite, so basically, by the way, like what is size of h, right? So h here is the hypothesis. So hypothesis stands for the particular model class that we are considering, right? It stands for example, if the model is parametric. So for example, if it's a linear model, then the size of h would be all possible values of the parameters theta that can take, right? And as we saw, theta can take essentially any continuous value in the range, right? So what this means is that no way that size of h is going to be finite, right? You could discretize this, right? So I mean, if you have a d-dimensional data, right, you could discretize theta into like say capital M number of bits, right? And then you basically maybe consider an optimization problem, which is like in this discrete space where we basically bin this and maybe do something like that, right? So that might be possible, but essentially what will happen is that you will require M to be very large, first of all, for this to make sense. And then the size of theta kind of grows exponentially um, in M, right? Because each parameter, I mean each range, I mean each dimension in the parameter would grow with M, right? So it would be something like M raised to D or something like that, right? And secondly, because of discretization, you could actually lose on in terms of the accuracy, right? So if most practical linear models or the simplest models like linear models, but any practical machine learning models is going to have infinite hypothesis space or infinite size of h, the question is what can we do, right? So right now we will only consider binary classification. It turns out you can actually extend this to multi-class classification, but we won't cover this in this course. So feel free to read up some material online that you can actually check this out, like how this is done for multi-class classification. But we won't discuss this. Okay. So one notion that we'll be using is the idea of VC dimensions. Okay. And VC dimension actually was invented in 1972 by Wapnick. So the V stands for Wapnick, and one of his co-authors. Actually, I forget his name. His last name starts with a C. So it's VC, right? So one of them is Wapnick, right? And the second guy is C. I forget his last name, right? So this was a 1972 paper, which is actually pretty old right now, right? It's I guess around 50 years old. So it's a very classical, very old result, but at the same time extremely powerful and a very neat analysis actually, which is used even today by several researchers actually. So I think it's kind of one of the most influential results in learning theory, actually, kind of the foundational results. Okay, so VC dimension, right? So we'll use a slightly different notion of complexity, and this notion of complexity is is the idea of VC dimensions. Okay, so the idea of VC dimensions actually depends on, in some sense, is the number of points in a particular dimensionality, right? So that you can classify with that specific model. Okay, so right now let's take the case where the model is just a linear model, right? So hypothesis here H is the class of all linear models, right? So consider all linear separators. Now given a linear separator, if I have 2 points, okay, can a linear separator, so given any possible assignment of these 2 points, can a linear separator separate these 2 points? Well, it turns out the answer is yes, right? Why is the answer yes? Because you have to consider 4 scenarios, right? So that's what this is going over. So if I have 2 points over here, I mean, so the 2 points here are plus and minus, then I have a linear separator in between, right? So this can be separated, right? If my 2 points are like this, plus and plus, then I can still linearly separate them because I just add the separator so that both of these points are in the same side of the separator, right? So this is also yes, right? Again, if this is minus and plus, I do the same thing. I draw a point in between, and this is also yes. If and then the same holds for minus minus, right? Minus minus also I put both minus minus on both sides. So if I have 2 points, I can linearly separate them. What about 3 points? This is still one dimensional, right? What happens with 3 points? Well, with 3 points also consider this scenario, minus plus plus, I can still linearly separate them, right? So I have basically my pluses are on this side, my minuses are on this side, it's a plus, right? What happens if it's plus minus plus? Well, it turns out a linear separator like this cannot actually linearly separate it because the 3 points in one dimension, the 3 points are in a straight line, right? So there is no way I can actually draw a straight line so that on this side I have only pluses and on this side I have only minuses, right? However, I draw my straight line, I will not be able to perfectly separate it. The reason is because even if I draw a straight line passing through these 2 points, it will not be able to linearly separate, right? So with 3 points, unfortunately, it does not work out. So what this means is that the largest number of points, this is very important, okay? So this will be what the key of VC dimension analysis is. So the largest number of points in d-dimensional data such that hypothesis H can separate. Okay, so the actual word that is used is actually called shatter, but you can just call this as separate. So hypothesis H can shatter or separate the points is the VC dimension. Okay, so we will actually see this more concretely. Even if you don't fully understand this definition, I will revisit this. I think we're actually almost out of time, so I will revisit this again in the next class. Okay, so for any collection of 3 or more points, there's always some choice of pluses and minuses such that the points cannot be classified by a linear separator in one dimension, right? So what this means is that in one dimension, the VC dimensionality, okay, of the linear separator is actually 2 because 2 is the largest number of points that can be separated. 3 points cannot be separated. So there exists, so you can basically find a set of points and a configuration, a set of pluses and minuses, such that it cannot be shattered. So this is exactly what this is, right? So a set of points is shattered by a hypothesis space H if and only if for every partition of the set of points into positive and negative examples, there exists some consistent H in capital H. Okay, so this is the main definition. You can just stare at this. I think this is a very, very concise and nice definition that describes this, right? So shattering, as I was saying, you can just think of this as separation, right? So the hypothesis space can actually shatter or can be shattered if and only if every partition of the set of points into positive and negative examples. So basically what it means is that you take the set of points and just combinatorially go over every possible assignment, right? And make sure that for every possible assignment you can completely linearly separate, right? Or whatever the hypothesis space is, that there exists some consistent hypothesis. So what it means by consistent hypothesis is that the training error will be zero, right? Or what it means that you can with the hypothesis you can completely separate the positives and the negatives. So the VC dimension, so actually this was the name, right? So it's the Vapnik Chervonenkis. So this was actually um, the C here stands for Chervonenkis. Okay, so sorry. Anyways, yeah. So um, the Vapnik-Chervonenkis dimension or the VC dimension of H over the inputs from X is the size of the largest finite subset of X that is shattered by H. Okay, so actually, why don't we end over here and I will start again from scratch on VC dimension because this is slightly more involved. I want to make sure that everyone understands the VC dimension. Because I think the VC dimension in the pack learning is going to be important. Going to be important for you to understand at least the main basic intuition going on over here. Because I think it's very fun. It's kind of very fundamental and foundational to the understanding of machine learning and particularly machine learning theory. Okay, any questions? I think we'll end this class and we'll start again. We'll start again from the very beginning of lecture 15. So I think next lecture we'll finish off lecture 15 in the next class. Any questions on either lecture 14 or lecture 15? Okay, so how do you feel about the exam statistics? Um, so actually I don't understand your question. What do I feel about the exam statistics? I think the exam was slightly harder. In general, I think as you saw the one got I think 88 was the highest. I think there was one more in the 70s, and most of the others were in the 60s. I think so. Particularly those who I think did not do as well on the midterm, I would definitely encourage you to spend some time on studying for the end term, and particularly those of you who are going to be giving the QE exam, right? So for the QE exam, typically the passing is going to be 50 marks, right? 50 out of 100. But just keep in mind the QE will actually be harder than this current midterm, right? Because the QE is going to be like the entire syllabus, right? And as I said, I think the midterm, the way I did it was slightly easier. The first half of the course was slightly easier. I will admit that the exam was slightly harder because it's even though the syllabus is just half and the syllabus is relatively easy, it's like the easier portion of machine learning, right? Now I think what we'll be doing will be slightly more involved because both the pack learning and VC dimensions are harder. Then we'll be taking a look at slightly more advanced topics like Gaussian mixture models, hidden Markov models. We'll be taking a look at basically ensembles and gradient boosting a little bit, boosting, and then we'll be taking a look at active learning, semi-supervised learning. So it's going to be a little bit more harder for the end term. I would definitely encourage you to spend quite some time studying for the end term and basically gauging now based on how the midterm was on the both in terms of analyzing and understanding the time as well as the hardness of the exam. And also it's going to be good practice for the QE exam, right? Because the QE exam is going to be similar hardness, if not slightly harder than even the end term. And the QE exam is going to be out of, again, the passing grade of 50. So, having said that, would be the following. No, so the end term is going to be both the midterm and the end term. And basically the entire course curriculum. Yeah, so it's going to be both, and I think I will have like half questions pre-midterm and half questions post-midterm. So it's not going to be like very hard, but instead of the entire question paper being like on somewhat easier content, is going to be now including some harder questions. So for example, there will be some questions on VC dimensions, right? So VC dimensions will be will be more involved. So do try to understand VC dimensions. Do ask questions actually. So try to show up on office hours. Try to maybe ask questions during the course. I mean, during the lectures as well. And let me know if you have not understood something. I would be more than happy to spend some extra time covering that content as well. If like multiple students feel like one topic is not clear, right? Yeah. Any other questions? Will you suggest some practice? I think I would suggest like looking at some past QE question papers. I know that some students have some repositories of past QE papers. Unfortunately, I myself don't have. I can try to see if I can lay my hands on some of them, and probably I'll send you like some one or two past QE exam papers so that you can practice. So I'll do that maybe just before the end term. Okay, so that's a good suggestion. Yeah, so I'll send you some past QE. There is the one naive-based example question available on the CS department website. Okay, so there might be one example question out there, but I'll try to send you one or two QE papers from like the last few years. I won't send you all of them because I myself don't have, but if I have like maybe one or two, obviously the questions will be significantly different, but I think they would be indicative of the hardness. So definitely would suggest practicing some of them. Yeah. Okay. Um, any other questions? Yeah, I think those students who got better than the average, I think did pretty well on the midterm. So I think a couple of students, the average was 58, right? So those that got in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s did pretty well. So the exam was definitely slightly harder. So I was expecting a slightly lower average, but particularly those that didn't do well, I would encourage you to spend some time and try to practice more questions and you know just just understanding the content better and the fundamentals again of learning, machine learning. Yeah. Okay. So all right. Thank you guys. There's no other questions. Then I'll see you guys again on Monday. So the homework two is still yet to be graded. I think the TA Hideo is going to be grading them. I did put the solutions of homework two on the GitHub page, so you can go through the solutions as well. And as I said, there will be an assignment coming up soon, probably the so sometime around next week, like next Monday or Wednesday. So around the end of this month, there would be one assignment coming up. So looking at the way the timeline is, I think we might end up only having three assignments, which probably is fine. Right, I think the assignments are going to be slightly easier since they're going to take, since they are take-home assignments. But because it's going to be three assignments only, this next assignment will be slightly longer. So instead of having like say 2 weeks, I'll probably give you guys 3 weeks to finish up the assignment. But it's going to be slightly more involved and more questions. Yeah. Okay. So if there are no other questions, then we'll end the call. Yeah. Thank you.